I'm Iris Tao in for Steve Lance tonight. Arrests are rolling in a day after President Trump declared a citywide emergency and took sweeping action to crack down on crime in the nation's capital. NTD's Mario Otsu has more from the White House.
Last night, approximately 850 officers and agents were surged across the city. They made a total of 23 arrests, including multiple other contacts.
Press Secretary Leavitt told us the 23 arrests included homicide, possession of dangerous drugs with intent to distribute them, and driving under the influence. In addition, 6 illegal handguns were seized last night, and Secretary Leavitt said this is just the beginning.
We also want to make D.C. safe and beautiful, and that involves removing mentally disturbed individuals and homeless encampments as well.
The press secretary said D.C. homeless can be taken to a shelter and offered addiction or mental health services. If they refuse, they will be fined or face time in jail. Leavitt reminds us these are not new laws, but
they have not been enforced, so we will be using these regulations and code that already exists to clean up our streets. And since the president signed this executive order in March, 70 homeless encampments have been removed by the U.S. Park Police.
In economic news, the White House says the America First agenda is working. The latest CPI report released today shows that inflation remains stable.
In January, when this president showed up to the White House, the 6-month annualized core inflation rate was 3.7%. Today, 6 months later, the 6-month annualized core inflation rate is 2.4%. So we are trending in the right direction. Small business optimism has reached a 5-month high.
While critics of President Trump's tariff strategy have warned that tariffs will sharply drive up prices, the president this morning said tariffs have not caused inflation or any other problems for America other than massive amounts of cash pouring into our Treasury's coffers. President Trump also criticized Goldman Sachs CEO David Solomon over a report claiming that Americans absorb the cost of tariffs. Meanwhile, the White House doubles down on its efforts to counter anti-Semitism. President Trump's administration is seeking $1 billion from UCLA over campus anti-Semitism claims. The governor of California, Gavin Newsom, called the $1 billion UCLA fine extortion, threatening that California will sue.
Bring it on, Gavin. This administration is well within its legal right to do this, and we want to ensure that our colleges and our universities are respecting the First Amendment rights and the religious liberties of students on their campuses, and UCLA has failed to do that.
This comes after Columbia University agreed to pay more than $220 million in fines and Brown $50 million for failing to curb anti-Semitism. And Harvard is reportedly nearing a $500 million settlement with President Trump. Reporting from the White House, Mario Otsu, NTD News.
The White House is gearing up for President Trump's face-to-face meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin this Friday. And this comes as the State Department releases its annual human rights report. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has the details.
This is a listening exercise for the president. Look,
the White House is characterizing the meeting on Friday between Russian President Vladimir Putin and President Trump as a listening exercise on the part of Trump rather than a negotiation.
This is for the president to go and to get, again, a more firm and better understanding of how we can hopefully bring this war to an end.
And that's what has to happen, as Ukrainian President Zelensky won't be there, but still must agree to anything for a deal to be made. Trump said Monday that he'll know whether a deal can be made to end this 3.5-year war after meeting with Putin.
Probably in the first 2 minutes, I'll know exactly whether or not a deal can be made.
How will you know that?
Because that's what I do. I make deals.
Trump added that he'll call Zelensky immediately after the summit and also call some European allies in NATO. And as for what to expect, Trump says that he'll discuss territory changes with Putin, meaning that Ukraine may need to give up some of its land that is occupied by Russian forces in order to end this war. Now, Zelensky has stated his unwillingness to cede any land to Russia and that he wants any peace deal to guarantee Ukraine's security from any future Russian attacks. Now, Russia has annexed Crimea and has troops in control of the areas in the Donbass region. Now, Moscow has presented ceasefire conditions demanding Ukraine withdraw its troops and cede much of that territory, and also wants Ukraine to renounce its bid to join NATO. Meanwhile, the State Department released its 2024 Human Rights Report on Tuesday, scaling back much of its previous year's report and saying that the previous years included a long list of, quote, politically biased demands. As for the report's length, The administration holds that actions speak louder than words.
We will have perhaps some in this case, smaller reports, but I would suggest that you watch the actions that are taken by an administration and that commitment to human rights.
Now, this report is congressionally required and offers accounts of all nations' human rights records. On China, which members of the administration and previous administrations have called the top adversary of the U.S., it details accounts of detaining political and religious prisoners all the way to transnational repression, in which the Chinese Communist Party violently represses dissent on U.S. soil and around the globe. Reporting by Jack Bradley, NTD News.
Russia is reportedly demanding that Ukraine withdraw from its own Donetsk region before Friday as a condition for a possible ceasefire. Meanwhile, European allies are planning a call with President Trump before his Friday meeting with Russia's Vladimir Putin. NTD's international correspondent Arian Pastor has more.
The EU is extremely active on all fronts to support Ukraine and put Ukraine in a position of strength.
European leaders are set to hold a call with President Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on Wednesday. The European allies are expressing support for Ukraine ahead of Trump's meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Alaska on Friday. European leaders say Ukraine shouldn't lose any land as part of a possible peace deal with Russia. They also say that Ukraine has to be involved in the peace process so that it can decide its own future. Zelensky agrees, making the same point on Tuesday.
It's impossible to talk about Ukraine without Ukraine, and no one will accept that. They can't agree on anything about Ukraine without us.
He added that Moscow wants Kiev to completely withdraw from Ukraine's Donetsk region before the Friday meeting. Zelensky says the withdrawal is a Russian condition for a possible ceasefire. Kiev opposes the idea and says its forces won't withdraw from the Ukrainian region. And the Russian Defense Ministry published this video showing recruits signing military contracts. This comes just one day after Zelensky said Russia is preparing for more attacks on Ukraine, despite peace efforts by the US. Meanwhile, Zelensky says he's trying to make it easier for draft-eligible men to travel outside Ukraine.
Currently, there is an age cap of 18 at the border, and I propose raising it to 22, so that there are no restrictions on crossing.
Ukraine first imposed travel restrictions on men of conscription age after the Russian invasion. Meanwhile, in Alaska, residents in Anchorage are preparing for the upcoming summit.
Well, I think it's really a fascinating opportunity for Alaska to shine in what we can do for those kind of venues. I think it's a safe venue for both the leaders to come here.
The state has historic ties to both nations. The United States purchased Alaska from Russia in 1867. Arian Pastar, NTD News.
And turning now to the New York City mayoral election, a new poll suggests that Democratic Socialist candidate Zohran Mamdani is leading by nearly 20 points in the 5-person race. According to a Siena College survey, 44% of registered voters in the Big Apple support Mamdani. That's followed by 25% for former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo. The incumbent mayor, Eric Adams, has only 7% of the support. We'll take a deeper look later in the show at how what Mamdani is proposing for New York City compares to what President Trump is doing here in D.C. How will the approaches have different results? Stay tuned for that. And for now, an update on the shooting near the CDC headquarters in Atlanta last Friday. A man fired 180 shots into the campus and broke about 150 windows. He killed a police officer in the attack. Officials said the shooter had documents in his home outlining his opposition to the COVID-19 vaccines. The documents are still being examined by law enforcement, including the FBI. And here's Chris Hosey, the director of Georgia Bureau of Investigation, at a press conference this morning.
A search warrant executed at the residence of the shooter revealed written documentation that expressed the shooter's discontent with the COVID-19 vaccinations. Evidence in this investigation indicates that the shooter had recently verbalized thoughts of suicide, which even led to law enforcement being contacted several weeks prior to the incident. The shooter died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Further forensic testing of the firearms evidence will be conducted by the GBI Crime Lab.
Officer David Rose was shot and killed near the CDC Atlanta campus last Friday. Rose was shot while responding to the incident and was taken to a nearby hospital where he died of his injuries. According to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, the suspect has been identified as 30-year-old Patrick Joseph White of Kennesaw. He was found dead with gunshot wounds. Hosey says today that he believes the shooter used a mixture of guns, including rifles, a shotgun, and maybe a handgun. He added that the shooter stole the weapons from his father's safe. Hosey said that over 500 shell casings have been recovered from the crime scene area. A total of 5 firearms were also recovered from the scene. Some 200 rounds impacted 6 of the CDC buildings. Meanwhile, in Austin, Texas, police have identified a suspect of a fatal shooting in a Target parking lot. 3 people, including a 4-year-old child, were killed in the attack.
What happened yesterday was an unprovoked and deliberate attack, a deliberate act of violence. Our department is fully committed to seeking justice for these victims and their families, and this will remain a top priority for us as we move forward.
The suspect is identified as 32-year-old Ethan Nineker. Authorities said he had a history of mental health issues along with several run-ins with law enforcement. Nineker has been charged with multiple counts of capital murder and first-degree felony murder. He could face additional charges as the investigation continues. And meanwhile, 2 Texas Democratic congressmen appear ready to compete against each other in the newly proposed Texas congressional map. Our Washington correspondent Luis Martinez joining us now live to break down this story. Luis, thank you for joining us in the studio. So first, tell us more about these 2 Democratic lawmakers. Who are they and why are they competing against each other on the newly proposed Texas congressional map?
Of course, these 2 lawmakers are Congressman Lloyd Doggett. He's 78 years old. He first got elected to Congress back in 1994. He's a senior member of the Democratic caucus. He is the ranking member of the House Ways and Means Committee. And the other Democrat is Congressman Greg Casar, 36 years old, second term in office. He's the chairman of the House Progressive Caucus. And why are they competing? Because the newly proposed the Texas congressional map is going to redraw the 35th district, where right now Greg Casar sits. But the redrawn district would now be in areas that Trump carried over by over 10 points in 2024. So most likely any Democrat running for the 35th district next year's midterms will lose to a Republican candidate. Now, one would presume that a 78-year-old lawmaker would step down to give way for a 36-year-old up-and-coming star in the Democratic Party as Greg Casar. But today we saw a campaign email from Lloyd Doggett suggesting that Greg Casar should run for the 35th district and actually try and beat a Republican candidate. But Greg Casar tweeted today that he loves Austin, Texas, signaling that he's going to run for that 37-seat district, setting up a primary challenge for Lloyd Doggett.
Well, sounds like an interesting race brewing up right there. Meanwhile, the Texas state legislature's special session ends this week. What are Republicans planning to do? How are they going to move forward with their plan to with the congressional map there?
So, Iris, today the Senate in Texas passed the proposed new congressional map for Texas, but the House hasn't been able to pass their the congressional map because the Democrats, the state legislators of the Democratic Party, actually fled the state over 2 weeks ago, so they can't even have a session because there's no quorum. Now, the special session that Governor Greg Abbott called for ends this Friday. Governor Abbott already said that if they can't pass the new congressional map by Friday, he's just going to call another special session until they find the quorum and until they actually pass this new congressional map.
Well, I've certainly heard the governor threatening to call special sessions for years to come, actually.
Correct.
And right now, Luis, what are Democrats doing then, both at the Texas state level and also in other states across the nation?
Well, as I mentioned, at the state level, we had Democrats who fled the state. They're now incurring in fines, $500 a day per each Democrat that is absent from the special session. And of course, Republicans are asking that the Democratic Party or the Democrats actually end up paying those fines whenever they do come back to the state. We also know that the national level, Governor Gavin Newsom of California has threatened to hold a special election to override the Independent Districting Commission of California to redraw the California congressional map. Similar things have been proposed in New York. The New York congressional map is a little bit more complicated. If they actually do go through all the constitutional amendments that they have to do in New York to do that, early redistricting, it would only happen by 2028. And the other state is the state of Maryland. There's only one Republican in the state of Maryland, so if they redraw the map, they would only gain one seat. But it's an interesting seat. That is the chairman of the House Freedom Caucus, Andy Harris, in Maryland, who could potentially be the second consecutive chairman of the House Freedom Caucus to be kicked out during a midterm election, like Bob Good was last time around.
Well, the midterms are heating up already early on. Thank you for that update, Luis. Appreciate it.